I want to start my discussion of stone tool flaking with the discussion of sculpture and what I understand as someone who has tried to make forms, and I'm going to give as my credential this ivory duck carving that I'm working on. It's going to be an eider duck. And I can tell you that when you're carving, you think in terms of stages, where you want to finish one stage before you go on to the next stage. And for something like this, I had to get a piece of ivory away from this chunk of chopped up, messy material that I had. I had to find a block that a part of it was big enough, and so I sawed it out. And then, pretty soon you're sawing the basic shapes. And then, you're sanding it in and filing it in and maybe carving it in a little bit and getting the shape. And then after that, you try to create the details and refine the details. And maybe later you polish it. But in sculpture, and I want to say it must have been, I want to propose that it was true also in the minds of people making stone tools, you had stages where you're removing the material from the core rock. You're making a big flake maybe, or maybe you're using the original rock and removing some flakes from it. But there are these stages that you're going to be thinking of, and I propose that they thought in terms of getting the initial piece that they're going to work with. Then they thought in terms of shaping that piece to the purpose that they had. Now that might leave you with something called a preform at that point, but I'm not going to try to talk about preforms. You get it, the basic shaping, and then you refine it, you detail it. So for stone tools, you are making flakes that remove the piece from the core, or just not, using the original core. Then you're taking additional flakes off of the piece that you've got to shape it more carefully for your purpose, and then you're sharpening it essentially. And I believe that those stages are theoretical and that you can try to measure them. So for example, I'm going to use a stone tool here, which has a variety of different pieces of surface on it, some of which I think must have been the original cortex of the rock, or actually they were part of what was removed in the first place to create the block. And I want to call the original rock stage 0, and this stage, those flakes, I'll say the primary flakes, the things that remove the material from the core. And then the secondary flakes are the ones like these that are coming in to shape it in a larger way. And you can see them. And then you see within them, you see these smaller ones that are, I'm going to call, so that you had primary flakes where they still have the basic shape and some outer core. Then you have the secondary flakes, which are, shaping the thing. And then you have the tertiary flakes, which are sharpening it. And that's an approximation to what's going on. And you can talk, I want to try to talk in those terms. In particular, I want to make another approximation, which is that, these things are a bit subjective. I'm looking at this, I'm calling this a primary flake, this is a secondary flake, these are tertiary flakes, and these are like edge details. I keep sneering when I say that because I don't want to count them just yet, because they're easy to confuse with use where. Those final serrations are, I'm leaving them out for now. Those little teeny things, the little pressure flakes along edges, I'm mentioning them, but to get back to the larger scale subject of primary flaking, secondary flaking, tertiary flaking, you can approximate that. You can't ask someone to look at a stone tool and figure out which is which. You can talk about the size of the tool. You can talk about how much of the tool's surface is covered by tool flakes of size greater than half the biggest diameter, less than half the diameter, and less than an eighth of the diameter. And it's convenient to talk in octaves and halves of things, because it's easy to approximate. You can just look at something and say, well, I want to say about half the surface here, or maybe about a third of the surface here is primary flakes, is just outer core and things that were removing the block from its original source. then maybe about half of it, or more than half of it, is covered with these secondary flakes. Let's just say, don't need to come up with a number right here. And then, maybe an eighth of the thing, or maybe a 16th of the thing, is actually tertiary flakes. It's not like it's got sharpened edges all the way around or anything like that. So I propose that we measure tools that way, and I will proceed to show you examples of how we can measure different things. I propose to use octaves instead of one's intuition as to what's secondary and what's tertiary. I'll define things by things that are bigger than half of it are going to be primary flakes. Things that are between that and an eighth of it are going to be in length, are going to be secondary flakes, and things that are less than an eighth of it, especially things concentrated along the edge like that, are going to be tertiary flakes. Something that's really made nicely is entirely secondary and tertiary flakes. Something that's made like a raw rock, it's got nothing on it. So there should be a spectrum of different things, and I find that I'm able to tease apart a little bit some of the different types of stone tools I brought back from Nevada by measuring them this way. I'll show you what I mean.